A county in the Midwest just paid $2.3 million to escape a contract they signed 7 years ago. They didn't do anything wrong at the start. They picked a solid ERP platform. They signed a reasonable SaaS agreement and they went live on schedule. But 7 years in, when they wanted to switch vendors and the product for better pricing, better fit, what they discovered was something very terrifying. Nobody on their team understood the system. They could use it, but the data model, the integration points, the configuration logic, all the knowledge lived with the implementation partner who had left years ago and with the vendor support team. So when they tried to migrate, they couldn't even scope the project. They didn't know what questions to ask. They had to pay the outgoing vendor $2.3 million just to document their own system well enough to leave. Now, that's not a horror story about a bad vendor. The vendor did their job. This is a horror story about knowledge that never transferred. Today, I'm walking through the 4 rules that prevent this. How to build knowledge transfer into your implementation so that 5, 7, or 10 years from now, you're negotiating from strength, not paying millions to understand or get access to your own data. Rule number 1, separate the we need help from we don't know how. Managed services have a place. Let me be clear about that. Once you go live, or when you're about to go live, or right before you do, the vendor, the SI might tell you, hey, we have an ongoing service where we can help you on an ongoing basis manage this system. It's called a managed services program. So managed services have a place. Let me be clear about that. Nothing against it. There are things you should outsource. Complex integrations, specialized security, 24/7 monitoring that doesn't make sense to staff internally. Strategic outsourcing is smart, but here's a difference between we need outside expertise for this specific function and we're paying someone else because our team never learned the system or never learned how to manage the back end. The first is a choice, strategic choice. The second is a trap you didn't see coming. And I've seen agencies pay 6, 7 figures annually for what amounts to admin tasks. Password resets, report building, basic configuration. Not because these are hard, because nobody trained their team during implementation. And now the managed services contract is the only option. So 7 years later, that's millions of dollars spent on things your people could have managed if only the knowledge had been transferred, if only someone had taught them how. So here's rule number 1. Before you sign a managed services agreement, make sure it reflects a strategic choice, not a knowledge gap you never filled. Rule number 2. Build knowledge transfer into the implementation contract, into your project plan. The implementation phase is when knowledge should transfer. That's when your team is closest to the system build. That's when consultants and vendor reps are on site. That's the window. But here's what usually happens. Everyone's heads down on go live. Configuration, testing, data migration, all urgent. Training gets pushed to the last 2 weeks. It's generic, it's rushed. Your team walks away with surface level knowledge. And then the implementers leave because their scope of work is done. And your team realizes that they can't actually run the thing that you just spent 2 years and a bunch of money building. I talked to an IT director last year who told me, we spent $4 million on implementation and $50,000 on training. And now we spend $400,000 a year on support because nobody knows how to manage the product, or we don't have the bandwidth. And that's the math of skipping knowledge transfer. You need it written into the contract as a deliverable, not an afterthought. Role-based training that matches your actual workflows, documentation in plain language, admin access and capabilities, fully transferred before the implementers walk out the door. So if knowledge transfer isn't a contractual deliverable in your implementation, you're buying a system you'll never actually own. So if knowledge transfer isn't actually a contractual deliverable in your implementation, you're buying something that you're going to be always dependent to manage. Rule number 3, protect your data sovereignty and exit options. Let's talk about what knowledge transfer really protects. Your future. When you sign a long-term SaaS contract, you're making a bet. You're betting that this vendor, this platform, this relationship is going to serve you for a decade or more. Maybe it will, but things change. Vendors get acquired, pricing models shift, better options emerge, AI disrupts operations, and when that contract comes up for renewal, you want to negotiate from strength. If your team doesn't understand the system, the data structures, the integration points, how everything connects, you can't evaluate alternatives. You can't even understand what migrating away would require. And that's vendor lock-in. Not because the vendor trapped you. No, because the knowledge lives outside your organization and your options are limited. Same issue with data sovereignty. You own your data. It's in the contract. But do you understand it? Do you know where it lives? Can your team export it, interpret it, use it independently, Bring in third-party tools to take advantage of all your data. I worked with a state agency that wanted to add an analytics layer on top of their ERP system. They own the data, but they didn't understand the data model well enough to build the integration. They paid a lot of money for what was essentially a mapping exercise, translating their own data into a format they could use. So here's rule number 3 again. Knowledge transfer isn't about running the system today. It's about keeping your options open for the next decade. Rule 4, making knowledge institutional, not individual. Here's a risk nobody talks about until it's too late. You do everything right. You train your team. You've got people who understand the system. You're managing most of it in-house. Then those people leave. Government has turnover, retirements, promotions, people moving to new agencies. If your system knowledge lives in 2 or 3 people's heads, you're one resignation away from square one. A city I worked with lost their primary system administrator 6 months after go live. The person who understood everything, the person that put it on his back to take the system live for the organization, gone. But they had prepared. They had documentation that people actually used. Not a 300-page technical manual, but practical guides for common tasks. Cross-referenced multiple staff. They had cross-trained them. They had clear escalation paths. The new hire was productive in 3 weeks, not 3 months. No crisis, no emergency vendor call, no 6-figure rescue engagement. If your system knowledge depends on specific people, it's not knowledge transfer. It's risk concentration. So the 4 rules recap. 1, managed services should reflect a strategic choice, not a knowledge gap. 2, build knowledge transfer into your implementation contract as a deliverable. 3, protect your exit options and data sovereignty. Knowledge is leverage. Data is leverage for the next 10 years. 4, make knowledge institutional. If it lives in one person's head, you're one resignation away from trouble. Remember that county I mentioned at the start, $2.3 million to escape a contract because no one understood their own systems. That didn't have to happen. If they'd built knowledge transfer into the implementation, if they had documented the data models, if they had trained their system, trained their teams to understand, not just use, but understand the system, they would have negotiated that renewal from strength or walked away clean. That's the difference. Not independence from vendors. You'll always have vendor relationships, but partnership on your terms, options, leverage, control over your own future. That's what knowledge transfer buys you. If you're in the middle of an implementation or about to start one and knowledge transfer isn't really baked into the plan, fix it now. And that's what we do at Avero Advisors. We're independent. We don't sell software. We help agencies own their own technology investments for the long term. If you want to learn more about projects and ERP implementation, click on this video below. Thank you.